What's up, guys? Welcome back to another edition of Before the Whistle, presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k services, there's no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's up, y'all? I'm back. It's Maddy Hudak. I'm still here down in Mobile. So if you're watching this on video, you probably aren't that whelmed by my background, but I apologize. I'm still trying to figure out how to get my camera working on this new thing while I'm down here finishing up the end of the Senior Bowl. I know that the game is on Saturday, but I think for most people, the true value is here throughout these days of practice. And if you caught my Monday episode, and if you're watching this one, I highly recommend that you check it out Monday. I'm doing fine. Wednesday's episode, it usually comes out on Tuesdays. I record on Mondays, and so I'm just all thrown off here. I did that as kind of a roundup of day one of the Senior Bowl, where there's two guys here from Tulane, the quarterback Michael Pratt, wide receiver Jaquan Jackson. And I thought of the two guys, Jaquan Jackson had the stronger day one. And I continue to add the caveat that I think I'm going to be harder on these Tulane guys than most people are, just knowing who they really are as people. On the other side of things, from what I've seen, particularly from Michael Pratt, which is where I'm really going to focus on today's episode, from the last couple of days moving forward, is really the exact opposite of that, and just leading these guys and really presenting himself with a sense of poise and command. And while Jaquan Jackson continued to really have a strong several days, I was a little critical of Pratt, just in the sense of knowing what his poise and command are and knowing what they're capable of, but also really having all that context in between the lines, knowing that there are some traits that ultimately practice and off-field interactions with coaches and players still aren't going to show. You could probably see a little bit of their competitive toughness and what have you this weekend, but all of the traits that make Michael Pratt great. I shared a video on Twitter where he was really just tracking down all of these guys and really coaching them one-on-one, trying to make sure that his chemistry was there. What I also saw was him trying to make sure that the guys he's throwing to and that are getting these reps with him are also getting something out of this and having the best experience for themselves. That was just what was so apparent to me. And going back on really the games that have just made me feel that he's in a different category, that this week of practice wasn't going to change for me, is what I'm really going to break down on today's episode. So as I kind of alluded to in my intro, and again, what I really talked about on Wednesday's episode of Before the Whistle, I was a little critical of Michael Pratt just because I really knew what he was capable of in terms of being a leader. And I didn't feel like I saw all of those traits that really make him great on that first day, while also adding a ton of context that it really just gave me an appreciation, especially watching him and Jaquan Jackson, for how difficult the Senior Bowl really is, especially in those early days for the quarterbacks and the guys that they're throwing to, where you were ultimately a group of strangers, one that's not even a consistent grouping through a set of drills through a series. It was always very chaotic trying to chart who Michael Pratt was throwing to, who Jaquan Jackson was catching balls from. And I talked about both of them on that episode, but Jaquan Jackson, I think, has really been a pleasant surprise for people here. Not a pleasant surprise for me. It's been very validating, just not validating to me, but I think validating to Tulane's program, that the guys that have come to the Senior Bowl from Tulane have all put out really good showings. But I would consider him probably more of that sleeper that not only rose due to his performance here, but it was a performance that I could see marked improvement from the things that he told me he was trying to work on. And so I'm going to kind of break this down a little more next week, because there is plenty to talk about from this week. And we still have, after that, no football. And we'll see how they both do in the games. But I know that quarterback is the most important position on the field. They're going to get the most attention. They're also going to get the most scrutiny, and they can alter your franchise. Your entire offense, your identity should be centered around the guy that you have under center. And so it's unlike any other position on the field where the identity of your team is really focused around a guy that is not yet getting to know anyone in the building. And so what's really stuck out to me watching these Senior Bowl practices is what are we really looking for here? And I say that, and I say we, I know that I'm here as a media member. I always just try to think what scouts are trying to look at here and what non-obvious things might we try to pay attention to. And it really struck me that because I know Michael Pratt so well, I know all of his traits and I know what makes him great. A lot of that is kind of impossible to display in a practice setting. There are little steps and ones that I think that he considerably took over the last couple of days here, but I just don't feel that these throws they're making in these non-live situations, and then no one should take stock from the game on Saturday where it is strangers playing offensive line together, and everything like that. But it's just a question of how much stock you put on their ability to make these throws in practice. I mean, to be fair, if you're consistently missing them or throwing interceptions the second that you get a defense out there or there's a pass rush in your face, you all of a sudden can't navigate the pocket, you can't climb it. Those things do stick out. And I think there are a lot of quarterbacks here who really their stock knocked considerably. And I don't know again how much that really matters in the grand scheme of things, but it certainly didn't help any of them. And then that's really where I think we're ultimately all in the dark of how interviews go with teams. I think that really makes a difference. And what people that follow Michael Pratt know is that you just know that he is interviewing extremely well. Just the type of person he is at his core. I really have no worries about that. But what he's really always been to me is such a leader of men. And the way that his teammates all just talk about him, the way that they all look to him for guidance, he just is such a true leader. And even in games where he wasn't able to play, I really just remember the Houston game. He was so active on the sidelines while Kai Horton was in that game. He was comforting Justin Ibieta when he got hurt, even though he was also hurt missing that game. He comforted Kai Horton when he was in tears after the Ole Miss loss earlier this year. And then that final drive to, against SMU in the conference championship, where his final pass was a pretty perfectly placed ball to Alex Bauman. Unfortunately, did not have the same Cotton Bowl magic attached to it. And it's, that's his final game at Yeoman Stadium. And the first thing he does after writhing on the floor in severe pain just 2 seconds prior to this play is go comfort Alex Bauman. That's the kind of guy I know Michael Pratt to be, and I know that it's in there. And so, more so than what he was doing when he was actually snapping the ball, my criticism of him on the first day came from the fact that he just seemed a little quieter and in his shell while acknowledging the fact that it is day one and no one looked good on day one. And what I'm really most curious about, and it's something that I think is a really core trait of Michael Pratt, is how he responds. And that to me has been really what, when we talk about winning the Super Bowl, or I'm sorry, the Super Bowl, it is, I mean, these quarterback Super Bowl, but the Senior Bowl this week, at least at quarterback, where you look at last year and there was just really nothing going on at quarterback whatsoever. No one came away from this thinking that anyone really considerably rose their draft stock. And I think you would be surprised to see how Michael Pratt really ascends. And it's going to be a very interesting one for me, knowing what kind of guy he is. I don't know. I'm not a quarterback guru. I'm a defense person, and I just haven't gotten that far into my analysis on that level. I always just continue to give that caveat. And so when I'm saying I project someone as a starter or a backup, I can't say for sure. I could say, if I went down the quarterbacks that I've worked around very quickly, probably just a off the hand thing based on a snap judgment. But I do have all of this knowledge about Michael Pratt. I've seen him in these critical game moments. And so while I think that everyone, including Michael Pratt, and especially Michael Pratt, just can benefit from sitting and being in the right team, I think it's all about the right fit when you talk about first round busts and any round busts for that matter. I always think how much of that is really the quarterback's fault and how much of it was just he was placed in the wrong situation or he was thrown to the wolves way too early with no offensive line. And I've seen Michael Pratt with no offensive line before, and it can get ugly really quickly. You can really say that about any quarterback, but sometimes his toughness gets the best of him. And you could see that being his worst enemy just as much as it's his best trait. You can see it over the course of the last couple of years, but you put him on a team, you throw him in day one, and they don't have a good system that doesn't fit his strengths. They don't have a good O-line. It doesn't really matter what I thought of Michael Pratt before going onto that team in that situation. While I do think that he can be a starter, and I could see him in a situation where it's very reminiscent of how he started his career. You look at him as one of those guys that I think could surprise a lot of people coming off the bench week 6, week 7, following an injury to the quarterback. But to me, it's really dependent on where he ends up going. And a lot of that can really be helped by what you do down here in Mobile. I don't know if I have any people in the Denver Broncos country watching this at this point, because I know that there's been a lot of connection over to Sean Payton. That's something I'm going to kind of break down at the end of this episode. I mean, I can see it, but I also can see the type of guy that Michael Pratt is. And just from my time covering Sean Payton when he was the coach of the Saints over here, I feel like I at least have a little bit of judgment here to be able to see that it does seem like a good fit. And you just look at how cerebral Michael Pratt is as a player. And that's just, again, you're going to see a little bit of that in these situations. And you might see a little bit more of it, I guess, in the game this weekend. But those are things I know to be true about him. And I've seen in game situations. So if we're going off of this week, it's hard for me to really say, oh, he really wowed people in one way or the other. I think that he showed all of his traits off and showed improvement day by day, where he was a little shaky on some throws and some throws were off. And I don't think any quarterback completed every pass, and some were just absolute awful throws by a lot of them. It just really shows you how impressive it is when a quarterback does look so seamless here, because it just is so many moving parts. But I think that he shows his ability to be accurate at all three levels of the field. Those throws that you saw him make to Shea Wyatt, to Lawrence Keys, just the perfect placement in stride in the end zone. And it's the touch. I remember my first year that he said he had a background in baseball, and I could tell because it looked like he was throwing for his life every single time. And that really speaks to his coachability, because he comes back. And the first thing I noticed in training camp was he had put a lot of touch on the football. And that's just something he's really continued to do. And again, not just on those kind of shorter passes, but the long passes just as important. And getting those passes to the right placement in stride, so his receivers don't have to miss a step, and those all turn into touchdowns. And he's thrown a couple of those passes here in Mobile. But to me, why he won this week was exactly and it's a video I posted on Twitter, but it's everything in between the reps. And he was in a group. I'll be honest, I didn't really watch that much of, I believe it was the national team with Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., and Sam Hartman, only because I'm frankly only here to cover these Tulane guys. And I haven't really heard that great of things from that group of guys either. But while I really focused on Michael Pratt, he's always in the group of guys with red jerseys. It's really easy to follow along with them. And as I was sitting in the stands on 2 days ago, on day two, was sitting with some guys actually that played at South Alabama that knew Jaquan Jackson, and really just spoke highly of him again. And it was cool to see people cheering him on. But I started to notice the fact that, in stark contrast from day one here, where he was just keeping a little to himself, I think just genuinely trying to soak everything in, he was right back to himself, kind of just taking off these really quick little runs like you'd see him do at practice at Yeoman. And I kind of just laughed, because it was just felt like his personality was just infused tenfold. And then you really started to see what I saw the first day of training camp back in 2021, where, his teammate gets a cramp and he's over there stretching out his leg. He is just a guy that everyone gravitates towards. And it's just all the more impressive when you consider the fact that he's only been playing football since ninth grade. And I believe he's had a different offensive coordinator every single year of his career, for that matter, different quarterback coach every single year through college. And his ability to just keep going through adversity and chaos. He's gone through a lot of things in his personal life that I've just, they're out there. It's just more than I think people this age should really go through, and going through that right before he comes to Tulane in a COVID year. And then I don't know, again, how much people know about Michael Pratt necessarily. And if you're trying to really learn about him, I think just his story speaks to who he is and speaks to the way that he displayed himself on the practice field the last 2 days. He was a true freshman here in the COVID year, where I wasn't covering the team at the time, but he comes midway off the bench halfway through a game in week 4 of the 2020 season and throws for 160 something yards, 2 touchdowns, and rushed for several yards as well, including a rushing touchdown, took over the starting job and never looked back. That wasn't the first time that has been something that he's done. So he didn't play football until ninth grade. He was homeschooled up until that point. Becomes a starting quarterback at his school. And then his senior year, he decides to transfer over to another school that already had a sitting quarterback in place at a better program, and beat him out for the starting job. I mean, that's ballsy. I mean, it really is, but it really just shows the true competitor that I know him to be, and that you just see him continue to just drive through anything that life places in front of him, including things that shouldn't have to do with football, like a hurricane and that evacuation. But the fact, again, that every year I've been at Tulane, it's been a different offensive coordinator, different quarterbacks coach, different wide receiver coaches for that matter, different offensive line coach. That has just been so much turnover for him. And you look at someone like Baker Mayfield in the NFL, why didn't he succeed? There's a lot of reasons, even though he's been more successful this last year, but there's always that thing, that graphic where if he had something like 9 head coaches and just so much change, it's really easier said than done. And for Michael to really just be able to work and grow on things year by year and shut out the outside noise and again, be this loyal guy that's truly as much of a good guy off the field as he is on it. And that's what you were starting to see really translate these last couple of days of practice, where quarterbacks are going to miss throws here. What I'm always more curious about is the response after the fact. Are they going to go sit over in the corner and just stand there and kind of, be embarrassed and maybe just talk to the coach, but never really kind of seek that player out? It was so apparent more than any other quarterback. And, he was there amongst 3 other guys in Joe Milton, Spencer Rattler, and Carter Bradley, that he was just chasing guys up and down the field through multiple times throughout drills, again, through multiple days of practice. There was a point today where there was a tight end doing push-ups for a missed rep that they had, and he waited until they were done. And I just to go over that with him. But again, it sticks out how much one-on-one time, how much genuine conversation that he was having with these guys. And that's to me what reps aren't going to show. But the same way that I really gave Jaquan Jackson so much credit on Wednesday's episode for giving it 110% as he continued to do throughout the week, even though he wasn't the primary read on every single target. It's really, again, how are you responding after the play is over, after things go your way? And what also stuck out to me as well was how much he cheered on other quarterbacks in a way that it just stuck out more than any other guy there, and going to over to them if they had a bad rep. It just, those are really what I think of what intangibles are. Those to me are really what I think of and what I see as some of the best traits of Michael Pratt. He has all of these football skills, but the ones that you saw are still really only a limited skill set. He kind of maxes out on those qualities being what really make him great, being a true leader that, again, led a team through the greatest single season turnaround in college football history, going from 2-10 to 12-2, leading his team in the Cotton Bowl the way that they did. It always strikes me that that second win of that 2021 year came in week 11, when so many teams just check out for the year. Michael Pratt never checks out in his life. And, again, to come back, say that they're going to the conference championship and have all of that come true, do what he did, beat the active Heisman Trophy winner, get all these offers from Power 5 schools, but want to stick at Tulane and finish his career out there, set all of these passing touchdown completion percentage. He holds almost every, if not all of the quarterback records at Tulane, and he's really high up there in the rushing category as well. And I know that he's very reluctant to run. And something I thought was really reassuring this week was the fact that he didn't turn into Ian Book or one of those guys where we all know that he can run, but he climbed the pocket today. He evaded pass rush. He did run a few times, and sometimes were lauded to claps, knowing that that was the correct thing to do. And he's still running, 50% of the speed. But the first time that I saw what really made him great was on TV. And it's just, again, there's practice guys and there's game guys. And I'm not saying that Michael Pratt is one of those guys, but there was a level of, I don't really have a better word other than just a bit psycho. When the game clock starts, that is Michael Pratt. If you've seen the Oklahoma game, you really need to look no further. But I just want to really go through what I think were his most critical wins throughout these last couple of years, and ones that I think if he didn't have, we would be having an entirely different conversation. I don't know what I would be talking about right now because he wouldn't be at the Senior Bowl. But even though that loss it was a loss against Oklahoma, that to me was the first time that you really saw what could translate at the NFL level, what people gravitate towards, and what a leader and tough player that he is. And then the 2022 season that forever went under the radar really showed how dynamic and how layered of a player Michael Pratt truly is. It's easy to hear a promo in the middle of a podcast and think, of course they like the product, they're paid too. Well, if you know me at all, then you know 2 things. 1, I'm truthful, almost to a fault. And 2, if I were in it for the money, I would be doing something else. So Believe me when I say that I love Blue Oak Barbecue. The food, the drinks, the people, the location, yes, all of that. Blue Oak Barbecue has a great selection of your favorites, from the smoker, fantastic sides, and awesome bar specials. What I'm really going to be excited to highlight each and every week here at Blue Oak Barbecue. Go check them out. 900 North Carrollton Avenue here in New Orleans, or visit them online at blueoakbarbecue.com. This last month, we've been going through the January specials, and as January is rounding out and Mardi Gras season is upon us here in New Orleans, no more app special to have than the King Cake Spectacular Daiquiri. And MJ, the guy who is the mixologist behind these creations, I really just can't emphasize enough how good every drink that I've tried has been. And be it in a daiquiri option, an espresso martini, the special we were running the other day, really, I could not recommend them more. But we're doing an extra shot option here this year where you can add to your King Cake Spectacular for just $5 a shot of white chocolate strawberry, apple pie, or banana cream moonshine. And I have had some pretty insane combinations over there at Blue Oak Barbecue, and I can tell you that all of them absolutely hit. So go check them out. As I gave the disclaimer before, I'm not a quarterback whisperer. I don't pretend to scout them, but something that you always look at with these guys is, do they have those critical wins in big moments against big opponents? And how much responsibility do they have in that aspect? And I feel like there were so many games for Michael Pratt this season prior to this one that went under the radar. And that was really because Tulane was just under the radar, for that matter. They get put on this national stage in the Oklahoma game. Michael Pratt has a performance that he does, and then they go 2-10 that year. But it struck me, and I wrote this down. The Kansas State game last year was on ESPN Plus, and that's crazy when you consider that Tulane was on national television every week this year until the penultimate week at FAU. Every other game this year was on a primetime slot. They had several not on ESPN2 or U, but on ESPN. Those final games on ABC, they have a national brand that they are building now. But week 3 of the 2022 season, I don't really think anyone was watching Tulane at all, for that matter. And again, all of the attention that they rightfully garnered in that Oklahoma win really kind of went away. But what I've been able to see over the last 3 years is, again, off the field, a guy that has just led his team through off the field stuff, on the field adversity, led an entire leadership turnaround involving his captains sitting down and making this list of things and having this meeting with their team. But the way the 2022 season went, the final stretch of that year, and we all know about the Cotton Bowl, but I really feel like it's necessary to just go back on how impressive and what these traits are that Michael Pratt truly has that you can see in these games. But I did actually go back just because it's been so long at this point, and I'm on limited time here. Practices end at 2. We don't get back here for a little while, just kind of wrapping things up at the end of the day, and then trying to figure out really what I wanted to unpack here about Michael Pratt. So I was kind of skipping through it as best as I could, but it's really incredible with about 6 minutes left in the third quarter of that game, where you can just feel this palpable switch that flips on in Michael Pratt, where that was really the game that put him on the map, where Tulane lost 40-35. They were a half a foot away from that final fourth down attempt by Michael Pratt on 4th and 13, laid his life on the line and got 12.5 yards. And that was the end of the game after scoring a touchdown and recovering the onside kick and leading the team down the field an upteenth time. But it was 37-14. And if people are aware of really what Tulane went through that season, then you can just kind of go through this. But we all talk about the hurricane. As someone that was down there in the Sheraton under construction in, where were we? We were right by UAB. I can't even think of the town that we were in right now because that's how much my brain has tried to block it out. I believe it was Birmingham. But we lived there. They lived there for at least 21 days and brought one change of clothing with them because no one really knew how bad it was going to be. There was a lot of damage to the buildings at Tulane where these guys lived. A lot of them lost their belongings. A lot of them had family that lost their belongings. There was a lot of stuff that these guys were going through during that time where they're trying to prepare for a number 2 ranked opponent. That I entirely forgot about as well, that Oklahoma was ranked number 2 going into that. So you're already these massive underdogs, and then you're displaced and you're having to get free weights from a local wellness center and give them Uber Eats stipends every single day. And that's what they're kind of up against there. And yet they still go to Oklahoma, and Michael Pratt just leads them kicking and screaming while he is under duress in that game. He got sacked 4 times. I lost count of the amount of times he was hit while he was throwing. And that's really what he displays as such a show of toughness is you're going to get hit while you're throwing in the NFL all of the time. You do have to obviously try to avoid pressure and understand and have that pocket awareness, but it's going to happen. And Michael Pratt steps up into that hit and lays his life on the line for literally every single snap that he played. But just watching how ragged he was getting up after every hit after hit after hit in that game. But he led these touchdown drives at the end of that game. He had 7 third down completions in that game, 5 by pass, 2 by run, but he threw for 296 yards in the air, 3 passing touchdowns. He had 0 interceptions. He was sacked 4 times, and he also ran for 34 yards and a rushing touchdown. So he was responsible for the 28 of the team's 35 points that day. And then unfortunately, that was kind of it for the 2021 year. Could probably go back and see if there were some games, but he was so injured on and off, and the team was just very broken. The offensive line was not good. It just was not, it was bad football outside of that game and really outside of Michael Pratt. I mean, it was just, he single-handedly took over that game and took all of the momentum away from Oklahoma, and they were this close to getting there at the end. And that was when I really started to feel like Michael Pratt, not, I wouldn't say could do anything, but the whole Denver thing that's getting brought up, that I don't really know how much I'm going to unpack on this show. I might do that on Monday when I really have time to kind of do that fit. But I don't say that he reminds me of Drew Brees. I did say on Twitter that he has told me that that is a player that he watches and tries to learn the most from. He thinks he's the best actual quarterback out there in terms of his cerebral understanding of the game. And when you consider that Michael has none of those physical limitations that Drew Brees had, has a lot of athleticism and a lot of those traits, it just really makes that impressive. But that was the first game where it just felt like he could keep leading this offense down the field no matter what the circumstances were, except the clock running out of time. And that was how you felt whenever Drew Brees would take the field for the Saints for those final couple of minutes. And it would be one thing if that game was a one-off where he did it, but he did it in these really big games as well, where his stat sheet against Kansas State didn't necessarily tell the day. I mean, he threw for 176 yards and 1 passing touchdown. He did throw 2 picks in that game. Kansas State was running a 3-3-5 at the time, which is very difficult to throw against in coverage. And for context, Tajay Spears kind of had a slow start to the season last year. And that was really the game where he had his worst output. I think he rushed for 8 yards in that total game. And they really thrived off one another. And Tulane's offense just thrives with that strong running game. And so Michael Pratt didn't really have that in this game that's not really friendly to trying to throw the football. But it was, it was 10-7 Tulane going into halftime, throws an interception. When I talk about his response to interceptions, this is really the game that displayed that the best, where he throws an interception, they kick a field goal. I'm sorry, Kansas State goes up 10-7 going into half. There are a lot of punts in this game, but Tulane comes out of half. They get the ball after Kansas State. That was one of their fourth down stops on the defensive side of things. The first pass he throws after his interception out of halftime was a 22-yard completion, and ended up also having a 24-yard run on that drive that led to a field goal, them tying the game. And 10-10, the end score was 17-10. He ended up throwing that final touchdown pass, but threw a 15-yard pass on that play as well after another interception was sandwiched in between the two of those. His first play of that drive was an 11-yard run, and then it was a 15-yard pass. He then had another 21-yard run on that drive, and that was the game where you really could see how he could just take a game over in so many different ways. And he just said, all right, I'm just going to tuck it and run it today. The speed and the heat of that game, where for context, that was the hottest game that I have ever experienced. And I was at the Ole Miss game in Yeoman in September at 2 p.m. in the New Orleans heat. Nothing has felt worse than that Kansas State game. The amount of starters on defense, including Nick Anderson, Dorian Williams, all of them that had to go get IVs in the locker room and missed a drive because they were that exhausted and dehydrated, it made that much more impressive how well Michael Pratt ran in that game. And sometimes the best decision is to just stop throwing the football if it's not really getting done that day. And I know that doesn't really work all the time in the NFL, but Tulane runs a conservative offense, and not turning the ball over and not panicking after the fact. He never panics after he throws interceptions, and he doesn't throw that many. He really takes care of the football, and when he takes off with it, he has such good ball security, such good placement, and that's something they really emphasize at Tulane. But it's just something that's really something that you're looking at Denver and Sean Payton not turning the ball over is very optimal, but it really is what can quickly get a quarterback benched in their rookie season. So those are really those two big games that year. But again, the game was on ESPN Plus, and it was a good day for Michael Pratt, but a good day for his legs. Really, it was the final stretch of the year that it showed what he could do in the air, and that was after their loss to UCF that season, where they had to basically win out and hope that someone else fell in order to host the conference championship. And I believe it was win out, and they end up playing in it. And they come out 4 days after, or I guess 5 days because it's Saturday in college, but that following week was Thursday Night Football against SMU. They beat them 59-24, and it was like they were just playing with their food out there, both Tajay and Michael Pratt in the passing game. But when they went to Cincinnati, it was again, a game that was very Tajay Spears heavy, but Cincinnati went up at the end of the game, and Tulane had not that much time left, and if they didn't score, they were going to lose the game, and then the season was over for them. And all of a sudden, he steps up and delivers these beautiful in-stride passes to Deuce Watts and Shea Wyatt on that drive, and Tulane immediately takes the lead and never looks back with just seconds remaining where the defense made that final stop. If you want to look at what Michael Pratt can do as a passer, there are a few games I would recommend. Tulane's conference championship against UCF, and then the South Alabama game this year, and probably the FAU game. If I'm being honest, there were some throws that he made there, and you could tell that's his hometown, and he just had that swagger. It's where he broke one of the final records that he did that year on a 40-something yard completion. I've seen a lot of things out there about Michael Pratt's arm strength, and I will say, I haven't seen him throw an 80-yard zip like Josh Allen for that matter, but that doesn't always mean that that's what makes a good quarterback. Execution, the ability to make big time throws, but that only really needs to be necessary if you're trying to score in under 20 seconds. Otherwise, you need a quarterback that can comfortably drive you down the field, execute the offense that you're running, and make those critical downs, make those third down conversions, be it in the air or by his legs. And he's just so balanced in the way that he's able to do that. But those two games are where he really displayed what he's able to do in the air. I mean, he threw for 394 yards in that UCF game. The Cotton Bowl, that's where you really just look at and see where Michael Pratt is truly a great quarterback. And I don't think I will ever see anything like that in my life ever again. But it wasn't that good of a day for him, all things considered. He completed 8 total passes in the Cotton Bowl. It was what he did on the final 2 drives that was incredible. When you consider, again, there is such thing as momentum in psychology, and it affects quarterbacks to me more than any other position. You can see, I go back to the final game of the year against UTSA, where Frank Harris just looked like a deer in headlights, and he was a 7-year veteran out there. Michael Pratt had completed 3 passes in the football game up to that final drive. 3 passes. And they are down 15 points, however many points. There's 4 minutes left. They have to score twice, and your quarterback has completed 3 passes. A lot of people are going to crumble in that moment. Michael Pratt, that final 2 drives, he goes 5 of 8. He threw for 117 of his total yards on that drive and completed 2 fourth downs with incredible display of what he is able to do. And it felt like that extra foot that he didn't get in Oklahoma, he was able to get on that 4th and 6 run, where that final drive for Tulane, the penultimate one, he literally just threw a 59-yard pass to Deuce Watts, and then just quickly Tajay Spears ran it in, and they scored in under 25 seconds. And I've seen him do that before, where you look and it's how on earth did he just do that? But that final drive was not going well for Tulane. They come into this game without their 2 starting tight ends, one of them being incredibly important in the blocking game in Will Wallace, but Tyreek James was one of his targets, especially in the red zone, but he was a receiving tight end. Alex Bauman had something like 3 or 4 catches going into that game, and the other guy he was throwing to primarily at tight end, Reggie Brown, was a freshman as well, who had about as much production on the year. And at that point, that's what was kind of working, because then Deuce Watts, after catching that 59-yard pass that set up that Tajay Spears run, he threw a pass down the field. He got knocked out with a really bad hit by that other guy. And so he's staring at the red zone with Deuce Watts is out there, but you can't use Tajay Spears at this point. Let's back up a little bit because the fact that they got to the red zone is astonishing. At this point, there's 1 minute left. There's no timeouts. They had to burn one because they had the wrong play call or something. It was one of those critical errors in that moment of, oh my God, now you guys have no timeouts left. So you can't use the best player of this entire football game anymore because you can't risk the clock running out. And so there is Michael Pratt out there without Tajay Spears again, much like that Kansas State game where he was out there. He was blocking for him, but wasn't able to run and get those critical downs. And he gets sacked multiple times on that drive. I had absolutely no idea what I was witnessing in real time, where he just continued to get back up and make fourth down after fourth down conversion, where he gets sacked and then he gets himself in a 4th and 6 position where the pass he had just thrown prior to that was the second one. But he was getting sacked. He couldn't get anything going. He was throwing incompletions and then is sitting there with a 4th and 6 and runs for 7 yards. And it was very, very close, but you could just tell that he was going to honestly die before he didn't get that 4th down conversion. But that was the entire game on the line. Then he gets sacked literally again. And then that was a play where it gets batted down by a defensive lineman, almost potentially a pick, because it was up in the air for a little bit. And you're kind of thinking, okay, well, nothing's really going well in this drive. And they're looking at a 4th and 10, and he can't throw a pass. And he goes back to it basically over the middle of the field and connects with Alex Bauman for a 24-yard completion that immediately follows it up with another 24-yard pass to Deuce Watts. That's where he got knocked out. And then he had absolutely no options in the red zone and throws the perfectly placed ball to Alex Bauman, where he makes that incredible catch. But those 5 passes really changed his life and showed that all he needs is one final drive, and he will do whatever it takes to get that done. And he can do it with his legs and he can do it in the air. And he's not someone that after 1 or 2 reads is just taking off and running down the field. He really wants to be that pocket passer first and foremost. And really just his understanding, you could tell in one of the videos I posted where he's simulating what the route is for the wide receiver. He really does know how everyone on the field has to be performing at every given time, and really has such a cerebral understanding of a game he's only been playing since 9th grade. It just really is incredible. And then he was hurt the majority of this year, on and off. It's a question of how much that really hampered him. Tulane was running a very conservative offense this year that he really just didn't have the chance to show that much off. And then he gets hurt at the end of the year. The receiving group drops like flies, and it's really hard to get anything done at that point, including a lot of injuries to Tulane's offensive line throughout the entire year. There are people watching that don't have all of that context, but that game that got pretty much Carter Bradley and Michael Pratt both invited to the Senior Bowl in one fell swoop against South Alabama, that shows you what he could truly do as a quarterback. But what he really did in Mobile was show that he is a leader and that he is that guy that can come into a situation. He needs 24 hours. That's incredible considering the circumstances, where when I say I always look at how people respond, that's where I thought Michael Pratt was really going to end up shining by the end of this, was just the way that he is as a person, and the way that automatically everyone was suddenly his teammate. He was tracking all of them down from the running backs, even though he's just handing the ball off to them half the time, making sure that he's throwing the right amount of touch on it. I saw him rerun plays with guys and go back to them if they didn't make that catch. And knowing who Michael Pratt is as a person, I know that he's a competitor and he wants to just get it right, but I genuinely know that just as much so, he wants to get it right for that receiver that is here at the Senior Bowl for their benefit and not his own. He is truly a selfless leader. And when you are looking at what traits you want in a quarterback for your team, even though I think that everyone still could stand to take a beat and learn and need to develop, the reason that I say that he should have gone to the draft this year is the exact thing that could end up happening in any quarterback situation for that matter, where even if you think you're developing them, well, all of a sudden QB1, and if you're not QB2, often they went down this year, and several rookies undrafted at that were thrust into these situations as starters for the rest of the year. So to see these undrafted guys be able to step in and think that Michael Pratt can't do the exact same thing is asinine to me. I can understand, again, to outsiders if you haven't followed along, but it's also really hard to just get all the context that I've been able to get as the sideline reporter and one that was evacuated with them, and just in the context of a very wild ride of 3 of the 4 years of Michael Pratt's career. Again, I wasn't there for his first season. But proud is not, I don't know if it's the correct term, but it is. I am both guys, but I really just feel like that's why he comes away as a winner here is teams that want that toughness and that leadership in that quarterback room are really going to endear themselves to Michael Pratt. And it doesn't matter if, in terms of, it does matter, I'm sorry, but irrespective of thinking about whether or not he's a backup, whether or not he's a starter, fit matters more than anything because it doesn't really matter if you're one or the other to me. Again, injuries happen, but if you're not able to develop and grow, then everyone just kind of ends up stagnant. And so I see somewhere where, again, I do see the fit with Sean Payton. I think that he is someone that, again, really appreciates the cerebral aspect. He has a little bit of that mobility that I think Sean Payton has been searching for a little bit on, as we kind of saw with a lot of his attempts at quarterback with Taysom Hill, with Ian Book, with just a lot of those guys that he drafted. And I know that Russell Wilson used to be more mobile. I don't know anything about the situation going on there, but knowing that he was looking for more mobility in his quarterback, and really everyone is, and not in the way where he's using it as a crutch at the expense of his development, but just being able to extend plays and just get the third down or the fourth down conversion. Michael Pratt does that all the time with his legs, and it just unfazed. There was a play where he did drop a snap today. I didn't really see it close enough to know what was really going on there, but I'll never forget that he dropped the snap on that fourth down conversion in Kansas State, and a lot of guys would panic and start kind of freaking out. The way he picked it up so quickly, I had to look back on replay, and he's just so unfazed by everything. And so I just also see somewhere like Detroit. Like I could see Michael Pratt and Dan Campbell being a true match made in heaven. And you want to talk about a good situation with Ben Johnson over there and with Jared Goff there being someone that is not the quarterback of the future, but someone that you don't have to put him in day one. But also you still have that mentorship because you could easily get a Will Levis situation where, again, he's coming in and ends up being a good deal, but one that you weren't necessarily expecting that year. So those are really my top two fits. The other thing I will say too, and shout out to Trevor Brenlin, who also works with us here at Heart in the Paint Sports. He went down to the media availability yesterday and talked with Michael Pratt, and he actually has a very bizarre connection to, well, it's not bizarre, but it's a little random connection to Mike Tomlin, where one of Mike Tomlin's sons plays basketball at Columbia, and that's where Michael Pratt's sister, Hannah Pratt, used to play basketball. She's now transferred over to Tulane and has been killing it, but that was mentioned as kind of that connection. And again, just these tough, old school kind of guys that really are looking for quarterbacks that have those traits to be that true leader and have that poise and that command. That's what I see in Michael Pratt, and that's where I see those teams really fitting for him. Like I said, I'm not a quarterback guru, but if you're looking for a guy that is accurate at all three levels of the field, he's willing to take those dump offs and checkdowns and not be the hero at the expense of his team and make bad decisions, really trying to just kind of, I see a lot of quarterbacks get in their heads and try to fix what's broken. And so they start getting a little more erratic. He does the exact opposite, where he is so poised after things go wrong. And that to me is just incredibly important. And that's just a trait that you saw a little bit here in Mobile, but it was one that you really had to see that progression from day one to day three. And nuance is really what I want to take away from this week, is I just learned the beauty of nuance in these types of situations where I think it's really hard to say on your face what makes someone a winner of the Senior Bowl, if you will. And I think Michael Pratt is a winner in an entirely different way than Tajay was last year, where Tajay's play just took over the entire Senior Bowl. Michael Pratt as a person took over the Senior Bowl. And to me, that's what makes him able to translate to the next level. And no matter where he ends up, I know that he will be a true competitor that will do whatever it takes to succeed. But if you put him in the right situation, I really think that he could truly end up being a starter at the NFL level. So I'm going to look at my notes and kind of look back at some of those games that I mentioned. I didn't have time, obviously, to watch all of them, but I know that there are now a lot of people that are kind of wondering if they're needing to start paying attention to Michael Pratt. I would say that all of you should, but in terms of where his fit is, I'm kind of still figuring that out. And I still have to give my flowers to Jaquan Jackson, who had a hell of a Senior Bowl and put himself really high in the conversation with his play this week. And I'm looking forward to breaking that down next week on Before the Whistle, presented by BRK Insurance Group.